Well, I feel like my entire career has been about people. I think when I first started and first got into marine conservation as a field, I think like most people who step into it at the very beginning think that, oh, my world is going to be about diving and interacting with animals and being in kelp forests or, working with dolphins or with fish or with snails in my case. But the vast majority of my time and work has been with people. And very quickly realized that conservation work is people. It's all about people. And we can't move forward on any conservation initiatives without building trust and building strong relationships.
Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. It's Suzanne. Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm thrilled to have you all listening today, and I am thrilled for our guest, who is Dr. Erin Meyer. This is going to be a conversation about conservation because she is the Chief Conservation Officer at the Seattle Aquarium. And one of the things I think is so intriguing about not only the work that she does, but the challenges and the courage of bringing people together around causes such as conservation, because it is really hard to rally people around something that is so important in our world and to keep them interested, motivated, committed, and to have that impact on a longer term basis. So let me give you a little bit of background on Dr. Erin Meyer. As I said, Chief Conservation Officer at the Seattle Aquarium, where she leads their global conservation strategy, oversees the animal care and rehabilitation, social change, field conservation and research, and conservation policy teams. She is a fierce advocate for decolonizing conservation and brings a focus of collaborating with tribes and other indigenous and marginalized communities as foundational to her work. Erin's interests lie at the intersection of people, communities, biodiversity, and action. She serves on a variety of committees and boards, including Aquarium Conservation Partnership Executive Committee, Reshark Council, and WASA's Conservation Committee. Erin, you do so much work. I'm thrilled to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
Thank you, Suzanne.
So I'd love to hear more about Reshark, because I know that this is something that you're on the board. It's near and dear to your heart. Give us a little bit of background into that. I think that's a great place to kick off.
Yeah, so Reshark is an international collective effort to recover threatened sharks and rays around the world. We are now a global consortium of almost 100 organizations, governments, and local leaders working across over 15 different countries, all working together, again, around recovering threatened sharks and rays. We do this work because we're committed to scalable shark and ray rewilding through these innovative global collaborative programs collaborating across all these different organizations and governments and working with local communities. And we link ex situ, so work that's happening outside of the ocean, with in situ, so work happening in the ocean, conservation efforts through breeding and conservation translocations. Big word. The IUCN, so the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, defines translocation as the deliberate movement of organisms from one site for release in another. So that's our kind of main focus for the work we do within Reshark.
Wow, it sounds like a massive endeavor, and it sounds like it takes a lot of people to make that happen.
It absolutely does. I noted that there are almost 100 different organizations and governments involved, but there are hundreds, almost thousands, I guess almost over 1,000 people now who are collaborating with us on this global initiative. And we only have one project running so far. So I can only imagine how big it's going to grow as we start expanding beyond our first project.
And what are some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced so far in this project?
When I got started, I thought, I think we all thought when we had our first steering committee meeting in February of 2020 to focus around our very first project. Mm-hmm. And I think we all thought that the hardest part was going to be getting the breeding done and getting all the permits done and getting the animals from place to place. And yes, that was far more complex than I thought it was when we first started talking about this idea. But the hardest thing about this project is also what makes it so successful. And that is bringing together all of these incredibly diverse partners. So meaning people from different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds, different areas of expertise, different industries, and creating a space where everybody sitting around that table, which is often a virtual table, feel comfortable speaking and sharing their expertise and sharing their perspective and finding that path forward that links together all of those unique experience and expertise to leverage that to push this project and the efforts forward. That has been the most complex, complicated, difficult, but also the most rewarding part of this work.
I really appreciate you calling that out, because what I'm hearing is just like relationship management on steroids. And that is one of the hardest things to be able to do in general in our lives. But in order for any project along these lines to be successful, it really comes down to building those relationships.
100%. And if you, as I noted, we launched or had our first steering committee meeting in February of 2020. Now let's all remember what February 2020 was like. I'm based in Seattle, so ground zero where we started hearing about COVID reports. And so for the first 2 years of our work together, most of us had never met each other. So we started with, under 10 people on a Zoom call meeting every week. And that quickly grew to, almost 50 people within the first few months, just building out all of our different working groups, again, with people from all around the world, all connecting over Zoom, all working hard to build trust over Zoom, which can be very challenging. I know for myself, that in-person time together is really helpful, right? You can break bread with somebody, you can get to know them on a personal level, and that's far more easy to do in person. But COVID kept us from doing that. And our project leader in Indonesia, so Neshi Chida and we hired her in kind of mid 2020. I didn't meet her for the first time until 2 years later. And we had been working together for almost 2 years, among other partners as well, right? So it's challenging to navigate trust relationships or relationships in general that are built over video conferencing.
Undoubtedly. And I'm imagining that you would have to, because you're dealing with so many cultures and so many languages and just so many different ways of coming to the table and everybody's concerns and immediate needs. I'm sure that you're balancing a lot. So I'm curious, what have you learned from that?
Oh gosh. Well, I feel like my entire career has been about people. I think when I first got into marine conservation as a field, I think like most people who step into it at the very beginning think that, oh, my world is going to be about diving and interacting with animals and being in kelp forests or, working with dolphins or with fish or with snails in my case. But the vast majority of my time and work has been with people. And I very quickly realized that conservation work is people. It's all about people. And we can't move forward on any conservation initiatives without building trust and building strong relationships. And I think with every project or every initiative that I've been involved in or have co-founded, it's always been a learning journey. Because, until this project, for example, I had never worked in Indonesia. And Indonesia is a country of over 14,000 islands. There are hundreds of languages spoken. There are hundreds of cultures intersecting across that country. And so, it was definitely a lot of learning for me to get to know the different cultures in Indonesia, because we have partners from all across Indonesia working with us on this project, who, each province within Indonesia has its own culture and language system. And so that for me has been a lot of learning. And I think, kind of reflecting back on, again, we've built this coalition of almost 100 partners. For some of the partners working on the STAR project and working on Reshark, this is the first time they've worked on a project outside of their home country.
Mm.
And, in this case, a lot of our initial partners were based in the United States, with some in Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, England, and stepping outside for the first time of even your own country to do partnering is challenging and a steep learning curve for those partners. So, it's been fun for me, in a way, to, help bring people into that space and help people, understand how to learn and listen to people coming from a different perspective, to, welcoming your own expertise being challenged. And that is a hard thing for all of us to do.
So beautifully said in so many ways. And it's a really, to your point, to the reminder of like Indonesia being so many islands and so many cultures, and going in. I mean, that's really challenging. That's really hard to also be, I mean, like, oh, I'm the woman coming from America. And I know we all have these reputations of being American and going in and doing things our way. So I'm imagining that it also took a good amount of vulnerability for you to get in that space and to learn and to also bring your expertise. I'm sure that's probably a dance for you overall in your larger work.
100%. And, I feel like every day of my work life and every day of my life is about checking my own privilege and, recognizing, that yes, I have experience and expertise to offer and my own perspective to offer, but so does everybody else that's sitting around the table. And, making sure that I'm also conscious of creating space for those other voices. And sometimes that means having conversations outside of that joint call, so that, I can understand where different perspectives of people are coming from, and I can help invite that on a call. And to be clear, the people sitting around that table on that call back in February of 2020, we had representatives from Conservation International, from Georgia Aquarium, from the Mosul Foundation, from Thrive Conservation, from Conservasi Indonesia. So from, organizations from all around the world. And, so by no means was this my idea, but it was definitely an incredible group idea that came together, after really many years of ideating in different circles. And we finally sat down together virtually.
What an amazing initiative. I want to hear more about this. We're going to cut for a quick ad break, but I'd love to hear more about how you got into conservation, first of all. And I'd love to talk more about why sharks and rays, the importance of Reshark overall, and just the broader work and the whole idea of decolonizing conservation, because I think that's fascinating and it's one that I haven't thought about. And I would really like to make sure that we get to speak to that a little bit more. So if that sounds good to you, we will be back, everybody. Stay tuned. Courage takes on many forms. I know from personal experience that one of the most courageous things we can do is to recognize when we need help and seek out support. If you're going through a hard time, feeling like something is interfering with your happiness or the ability to achieve your goals, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and accessible. It's an online platform where you can be matched with a professional therapist in as little as a few days. For more information and to get matched with a therapist, go to BetterHelp, that's HELP.com/courage. Visiting this link both supports this show and gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Welcome back to The Courage Effect. This is Suzanne, and I'm in conversation with Dr. Erin Meyer, who's the Chief Conservation Officer at the Seattle Aquarium. So, Erin, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, how you got into conservation.
Oh, goodness. Well, I got into conservation, I feel like years and years and years and years ago, because, I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest, in Seattle, out on the water and underwater here on our boat out on Puget Sound, fishing, swimming and diving in the water, here in our lakes and in the Puget Sound, and hiking up in the mountains. And, I feel like I felt this deep connection to place since I was a kid. And I got certified in scuba diving when I was 11. And I think, like every 11-year-old who thinks they want to do marine conservation, I thought I would spend my life swimming with dolphins, and that would be my worldview as a professional. Which is not what I've done as my academic or professional work. I guess I had been in the water with dolphins, but it has not been the focus of my work. But I feel like I've wanted to be a marine biologist since I was maybe 4. And here I am.
You did it.
I did it. And, it's taken me all around the world, which has been incredible, right? I've never studied dolphins, but I have studied snails and seagrass and kelp forests and fishes and coral reefs and sea turtles, but never dolphins. And now sharks.
And let's talk about that. So why sharks and rays?
Yeah, so sharks and rays are among the most threatened animals on our planet. There are over 400, or at least we think there are over 400 species that are listed as threatened under the IUCN, including some that are data deficient. So we think there are several more that we don't know for sure. So likely over 400 that are threatened and endangered around the world. And mainly due to human interaction. So mainly due to overfishing or habitat loss around the world, and in some cases because of climate change as well. And so, when we, take a step back and we look at, from a marine perspective, what are some of the most important animals to make sure that we are restoring and that we are bringing back if we can? And they are sharks and rays. They play incredibly key roles in ecosystems, all different ecosystems of our ocean. Not always as the keystone predators, sometimes as ones that are managing or keeping other species at bay that are a little lower on the food level. But they are incredibly important in every ecosystem that they're in. And, I feel that it's part of my obligation to find a way to restore and rewild these incredible animals.
Yeah. Well, and okay, I'm a child of I was born in the 70s. So I grew up with Jaws. And I'm just going to say this. I mean, I feel like sharks overall have a bad rap. I feel like people are terrified of them. Do you feel like this plays into the larger narrative?
It is something that I see all the time, right? That there are people today and generations of people who are afraid of sharks. There are cultures around the world who are afraid of sharks. I think they're among the most misunderstood animals on our planet. There's a lot of biodiversity of sharks and rays. They don't all look sharky shark like the great white sharks, but even they are gentle giants in our ocean. It's not like I forget all the stats right now, but you're more likely to get hit by lightning than you are to get bit by a shark. And there are, it's very rare, but when it happens, it gets blasted across our media. And it's not doing good things for helping to recover these important species in our ocean. And one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do through the work of Reshark is to help change that narrative, to help move people from being afraid of these incredibly majestic animals to respecting them, maybe even loving them, but at least respecting them and understanding that they play an important role in our ocean ecosystems.
Definitely. And what about for the aquarium? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing there? I mean, I'm sure that they're quite similar to what you're doing with Reshark, but I'd love to hear something a little bit more locally focused.
Yeah, so here at the Seattle Aquarium, so of course I work at the Seattle Aquarium, we have our new Ocean Pavilion is opening this summer. And in that new exhibit space, we will be home to multiple species of sharks and rays, including the Indo-Pacific leopard shark or zebra shark, which is the focus of the first project of Reshark. And in about 7 years or so, when our little pups we have here are mature, they will also be breeding and producing eggs in support of the STAR project to help rewild their wild counterparts in Indonesia. So we really look at our role as an aquarium as we are a conservation organization, and we look to look at the species in our care and the incredible breadth and depth of expertise that our staff have across the organization, and find ways to partner and co-create new conservation initiatives here locally in Washington, but also all around the world through efforts like Reshark.
It's fantastic. and I can't wait for the pavilion to open. I will definitely be there this summer.
Summer 2024.
Here we go. It's coming up. And I'm curious too, so when you use the term decolonizing conservation, talk to me a little bit more about that.
Mhm. So when we look across the history of conservation, whether we're talking about terrestrial conservation, marine conservation, just conservation writ large, the way that, at least in the kind of Western focused words, when we think about when conservation started from a Western point of view, we think about that as when Westerners or Western NGOs or nonprofits or other organizations started engaging in conservation work. And the way that that typically happened when conservation first started is conservation organizations would kind of parachute in to a location within their same country or within another country with some funding at hand and goals already in place to move forward on some kind of conservation effort. That could be setting up a protected area. That could be restoring a wild population of some species. That could be, shifting a community from an extractive form of an extractive economy to something that's more of a tourist economy that has a lower impact on the environment. And typically, the duration of that engagement would last as long as the funding lasted. And then that organization would leave. And in most cases, there would be limited participation or collaboration with the local community members, at least not in any kind of leadership or meaningful way. And there have been dozens of papers written about this now, looking at, how we were doing it wrong for decades, and how we can see that when you start a conservation project and you do not co-create it with local leaders and local NGOs, that it's less likely to be successful, it's less likely to be enduring, and it's less likely to have the full impact that you intended, or unintended positive impacts that come now as we're starting to see more co-created conservation work. And so, my focus on decolonizing conservation is exactly that. It's making sure that even at the point of ideating around a new conservation project, before the table is even set, that we are reaching out to leaders in the place where the work is going to happen and inviting them to ideate, to share, to help influence the direction of the project and even who else should be sitting around that leadership table. And that it's not just in one part of the project and then done. It's not just at the beginning, it's not just at the end, but that we're engaging with local communities, with indigenous communities, with tribes and other indigenous leaders throughout the entire process. And that has been an incredible journey for the STAR Project and Reshark, and continues to be a journey that we're on here at the Seattle Aquarium through all of our conservation efforts.
I love hearing that. I mean, especially because you're integrating, you're not just doing the drop-in conservation. I mean, and I never thought about that. Like, it goes until the funding runs out, and then it's like, okay, I guess you're out of luck now. But the idea of coming in and really talking to Indigenous and Native people, and especially here, I mean, and that's one of the things that I know that you're doing at the aquarium. That's part of your new pavilion project, is it not?
Yeah, so our new Ocean Pavilion, which is opening in summer of 2024, has been an incredibly inspiring project for me. So I started at the Seattle Aquarium just over 6 years ago. So this is my first aquarium construction project I've ever been involved in. And within that first year that I started working at the aquarium, we hosted design meetings with Indigenous leaders here from the Pacific Northwest. And ever since that first design meeting where we brought Indigenous leaders into the room, we began working with Indigenous consultants. So with Coast Salish consultants and urban Native Indian consultants here from the Seattle community, who sit together with the rest of our design team to co-create and design the Ocean Pavilion. And we also worked with an Indigenous consultant to help us select the Indigenous artist that we're working with for the Ocean Pavilion, who designed the artworks that will welcome our 1.2 million guests into the Ocean Pavilion every year. And so there are artworks that will be above your head that are designed by Dan Friday, who's a Lummi artist here. and also some artworks that are designed that are on the roof of our new Ocean Pavilion building as well. So it's been an incredibly inspiring learning opportunity for me in our partnerships with our Coast Salish leaders here and our Coast Salish communities here through the work of the Ocean Pavilion. And I can't wait to see it come to life.
So inspiring. And I love the idea of bringing in, I mean, the consultant to make sure that you're, having the right conversations, bringing the right people to the table. And I would also imagine there's a certain amount of letting go of control as you're allowing that innovation to happen and you're learning from the process, as you just said.
Yeah. So when to select the artists we worked with for the Ocean Pavilion, we hired that third-party Indigenous consultant. She created an all Indigenous panel who reviewed and selected the final artists. And we stepped away from having control over that, recognizing that we wanted the artists to be selected by Indigenous leaders and Indigenous partners, not by us. And what has happened through that process and how inspiring that has been to us as we think about how we carry that through and talk about that work has been really exciting. It's going to go beyond just this one project and influencing other projects going forward, or at least I hope it will.
Great work. Well, I can't wait to see it. And this conversation has gone so quickly, and I'm sorry to say that we have to wrap, but I want to share a couple of things that I heard you say. First and foremost, conservation is about people. So what are the relationships that we need to have? How do we also respect Indigenous and Native peoples as we're doing these conservation projects overall? And respecting the animals, respecting our the environment, the Native peoples and the animals. And there's a certain amount of humility that goes along with that. And I think that is also giving up control and being open to learn and having the courage to do that. So going back to, you said that you were in fourth grade when you decided that you wanted to become
4 years old.
4 years old when you wanted to become a marine biologist. So what is the thing that yourself now would love to go back and tell your 4-year-old self?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I grew up wandering the halls of the Seattle Aquarium, actually, and looking into those habitats there and really seeing what's in there. But yeah, I really did think when I was 4 that I was going to spend my life studying dolphins. I don't know if it would help my 4-year-old self to know that that's not what I'm going to do. That might deter me from pursuing that path. So I don't know that I would tell that to myself. I think maybe it would be good for my 4-year-old self to know that people matter, that getting involved in the ocean also means working with people, and in a way that maybe a 4-year-old, I have a 6-year-old son, so in a way that maybe a 4-year-old would understand. But yeah, I think I would tell my 4-year-old me, conservation is not just about the ocean, it's also about people.
I love that. I'm also curious for you, since you were a little girl walking around in those halls and exploring, what was it like when you actually became one of the key leaders of the organization?
It was nostalgic when I first came back to the aquarium, because it had been a really long time since I had been here, because we moved out of Washington State when I was 12. And so it'd been a few decades since I had been back here. And so when I first stepped through, actually during my interview on a tour of the aquarium, I just had these moments of thinking that everything was smaller than the last time I saw it, because I'm a little bit taller now than when I was a youngin' wandering around the aquarium. And there are new pieces to the aquarium that weren't here when I was here as a kid. So the front half of Pier 59 wasn't here yet. And that new habitat, the window on Washington waters, is spectacular and is highlighted after a very specific spot on the coast of Washington. And so that actually took me back to some of my first dives when I was in Washington and doing some of my first diving. So it's been nostalgic, and I feel like my inner 4-year-old come out when I walk into the dome habitat in the aquarium. It kind of reminds me of what it was like when I was a kid.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love the whole idea of when you're an adult, everything seems smaller, right? It's like, wait, how did that get? I remember this being gigantic. This is just a very different experience. And one final question. How does courage come into your job, to your role, and what you do?
I feel like courage comes into what I do almost every day, because I have to have the courage to be vulnerable with partners from all around the world. I have to have the courage to call people in if they've done something that negatively impacts another partner. I have to have the courage to call myself out when I've done something that has impacted another partner. And every single one of those mistakes that either I'm making or that another partner makes is an opportunity to grow and strengthen trust. And I have to have the courage to take that step, to recognize that being vulnerable and calling somebody in or calling somebody out is how we move forward. And it's hard. And it is not an easy decision to make every time. But I know that it's needed, or I know when it's needed.
I also really appreciate you're using the language of calling somebody into a conversation, which for me is a game changer, because it's not about pointing out something as a problem, but you're opening up and inviting somebody into a conversation so you can create new results together.
Yeah. And that calling in, it's taking the time outside of the group meeting when another colleague shares, someone said this on this call, and here's how that impacted me, and then kind of taking that on as part of what I do to have those conversations outside of a group conversation to help people. Because oftentimes, it's most often not that people are saying things to intentionally cause harm. It's often because there's not that self-reflection or that self-awareness that something that they're saying could cause harm. And so sometimes that first conversation is a very challenging one for someone who, maybe partner work is new or cross-cultural work is new, and helping them to understand that how you say something, what words you use, when you speak, that in a meeting, all of those things matter and can impact partners on a call. And it gets very complicated when you have multiple cultures represented on a call, to not make a misstep. So in some ways, it's just recognizing you're going to and being open to the feedback of, here's what you could do better.
The courage to learn and to learn from other people. So you're calling people in and really understanding that maybe you come from different places. Maybe the way that you are saying something intent-wise isn't necessarily coming through in how you're communicating.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Erin, any final thoughts as we wrap our conversation today?
Well, maybe two final thoughts. One, if you're inspired by hearing about the work of Reshark, I encourage you and all the listeners to check out reshark.org to learn a little bit more about our work and check out our mini documentary series. And I also encourage listeners to take a look at seattleaquarium.org. We'll be posting in the coming months a little bit more about the opening of the new Ocean Pavilion.
Fantastic. We'll put all of that in the show notes. And thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you for listening. Stay courageous. The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. We partner with individuals, teams, and organizations to enhance leadership, increase agility, and build effective teams. More information about us is available via the links in our show notes. Please spread the word about the Courage Effect. Rate and review your favorite episodes on iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Share with your colleagues, family, and anyone in your universe who might be inspired by a good dose of courage. If you have feedback or stories to share about the show or would like to apply to be a guest, please contact us via our website. Benny Mathers is our producer. Dave Nelson composed our theme music. Alex Sandyforth is our administrative maven, and I'm your host, Suzanne Weller.